Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Woman Crush Wednesday conversation with Christy and Takema. How you ladies doing?
Great.
Awesome. Excited.
Absolutely.
Thank y'all so much for making time. And I've been thinking about this for the last couple of days, and apparently a lot of folks are excited to hear what we're going to talk about tonight. I had conversations with two sisters a couple of weeks back who were sort of thinking through transition and the next chapter in their careers. And I was like, oh, well, then you need to come be a part of this conversation and listen to Takema and Christy and their stories of sisterhood and development, both personally and professionally, that has sort of brought them to this moment in life and in the work. And so, and then we've got about 80 plus people registered to hear what y'all got to say tonight. So, I don't want to waste any more time other than to say thank you all for coming, those who are in the audience with us live. And I want to give each one of you an opportunity to just sort of spend a couple of minutes sharing who you are, what you do, and why. So I'll start with Christy.
Great. I was hoping you were going to start with Takema, but that's all right.
Guys.
Surprise. Thank you, Toya, first for inviting me. I'm just thrilled and honored to be here, and I get to, talk with Takema. Come on, this is great. I'm Christy Wallace Slater. I am the Vice President of Programs for the Women's Foundation of the South. I have been in this role for almost 2 months. So I'm a good solid 6 weeks in. So, this is when we get to the part of the transition and starting the new journey. This is where I am. I've been in philanthropy for almost 18 years now. So I guess it's finally a career. And I am a wife and mother of 2 very brilliant, feisty children. And I'm just thrilled to be here. I'm gonna turn it over to Takema so we can dig into this conversation.
Okay, so we both had children around the same time, and
right.
We both built for the same time. So I didn't need you to quantify that with 18 years, because there's no way, I can look like this and have done anything for 18 years. So I can't accept that, but I think it has been that long for me as well. And so, so happy to have this space and time, Toya, with you and Christy. Thank you to the Voice Vision Values team for inviting me, and Toya for you leading this work. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Takema Robinson Llewellyn. I am the founder and the CEO of Converge Consulting. We are a social justice consulting firm, very much rooted in the South, growing out of the work I've done in Louisiana and in New Orleans. I also serve as the director of the Greater New Orleans Funders Network, and previous to that served as a senior program officer at the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. And so I do a lot of work across the philanthropic spectrum, both leading Godolphin's work of doing strategic advising for other foundations and funder collaboratives. So I'm looking forward to jumping in this conversation and talking about these 18 years of experience that Christy and I have shared in our journey together.
Awesome. Yeah, 18 years, and a lot has changed in just the 5 years that I've come to know you both and had an opportunity to work with you and learn more about not just what you've done together in New Orleans, but the sort of broader influence and leadership impact you've had across the field. And I have to say, when we first met, in the case of Takema and I, we were both married to other people, right? We were sort of both at a stage of like figuring out the future. And while Christy is still married to the same person, right? When we came to know each other, again, this theme of figuring out the future. And so I want to sort of frame our conversation in this sort of flashback, flash forward context. because in the 5 years that I've known you both, so much has changed. But even if we go back further, right, to the early sort of recognition on the parts of Sharice, Lynetta, and Gladys about sort of a moment in New Orleans after Katrina, where there was an opportunity presented to the field and a responsibility that these women sort of felt called to organize the field in a transformative way. And so can you all talk about sort of that moment in the beginning at the point when Katrina had devastated the region, and the role those Black women and others, right? But here at Voice, Vision, Value, we are clear about the celebration and the documentation of Black women's impact in the sector. So we're gonna frame this around those pioneers and giants, and sort of the moment at which they organized the field in the creation of and the leadership of the Disaster Recovery Foundation and the Central City Funders Collaborative, right? So Christy, can you talk about that moment?
Sure. So when Katrina hit, I was actually working in the Mayor's Office of Economic Development. And that's where I was doing my initial grant making was small business technical assistance grant. So working from the economic development side. And when the storm hit, and I'm sorry, I should say living in New Orleans, right? So when Katrina hit, there was massive city employee layoffs. I was in that number. And when I moved back to New Orleans, this was January 2006, just a few months, the storm hit August of 2005. And my family we were displaced to Houston, thankfully, had family there that we were able to be with. But I came back first. And so January 2006, came back, started working at Hope Community Credit Union. I was a program officer there doing small business disaster recovery lending. And that was really my kind of entree, I guess, into philanthropy as a field in terms of working with in partnership with other funders and in a particular neighborhood. So in the Central City neighborhood of New Orleans. I have to say that I am thankful for the thought partnership and just the guidance of all the women that you mentioned. So Lynetta Gilbert, Gladys Washington, Sharice West Scantlebury, because at the time I was living in a FEMA trailer. My whole thought was I needed to come back and be a part of the rebuilding for my own healing, but my world was torn apart. So in most of these conversations, I was in a space of keeping New Orleans front and center, while you had other foundations that were wanting to come to help to rebuild New Orleans for a variety of reasons. It tugged at their heartstrings. They felt like it was the right thing to do. So a lot were clout chasing. They wanted to come in and take over while everybody was destroyed and out of the city, right? There was all types of funders in New Orleans for a variety of reasons. And I'm so thankful for the Black women in particular that said we need a broader strategy and we need to leverage each other's resources, and we need to build off of the strengths of the communities who already had been doing planning before Katrina. So that way we could, we don't have to start from scratch. We can invest where the community has already given their voice to what they want to see. And the Central City Funders Collaborative came about because there were several funders funding in this one particular neighborhood. It was a Black neighborhood that it was prime for gentrification. It was proximate to downtown New Orleans. It was blocks away from the Superdome. It was bordered by St. Charles Avenue, which is, the Garden District and all of the fancy mansions and stuff. When you see all of those streetcar shots of New Orleans, going down St. Charles. And if there was not an intentional effort, it would have been just a blink of an eye. And the folks who had made that neighborhood home, who made it what it was, would no longer be able to live there. And so understanding all of the funders that were investing in this neighborhood, there was a desire to bring everybody together along with all of their grantees in order to develop a strategy for what investment would look like. And out of that work came action tables on the funder side, 3 key community projects on the community side. And what I appreciate about the Central City Funders Collaborative was that not only were we able to leverage each other's investments and put significant dollars into this neighborhood, but it also changed funder behavior. So it changed how we operated, how we worked together. National foundations were in greater partnership with local funders, and often it took a while, but it got to the point where they let them lead and they trusted the voice and experience of the local funders. And as new folks were coming into town, they met with the locals first. That wasn't happening prior to this collaborative. And it also created a greater level of accountability all the way around. And so I'll stop right there.
Yeah, Christy, I think you really laid out the story, I think nicely, and I really wanted to make sure as someone from New Orleans that you went first. So just so the audience knows, I am not from New Orleans, and I actually moved to New Orleans post-Katrina. I initially landed in New Orleans. So Lynetta Gilbert and I have been friends for a while. She had been a mentor of mine. We went to the same church. The famous Emmanuel Baptist, Marcus Littles is out there, and other folks who've attended. So many of us knew each other in that context. And so I remember Katrina happening from the perspective of watching Lynetta begin to mobilize and organize in New York. And I was at another sort of crossroads in my life at the same time where I was trying to figure out what did the future hold for me. And I knew that I meant leaving New York City, and I really felt called to be part of what was happening in New Orleans, as I had spent about a year as a lone executive in the region working in schools. And so through that experience and through Lynetta's, guidance and support, I actually took a job to work in New Orleans, trying to bring schools back online. And I always tell the story of the women's group at my church coming together and throwing me a huge send-off party. And at the end of the party, just like Black women do, they came up to me. I remember it was Jackie Berry. She was head of the Legal Defense Fund, rest in peace at the time. She went on to be the head of EEOC under Obama. Jackie walked up and put a little something in my hand from the women at the church for my move to New Orleans. And so that's how I got to New Orleans, was through Black women's leadership and through watching from the perspective of, Lynetta in the New York side trying to mobilize funders. And as folks may know or may not know, many of those funders in New York were huge investors that stood up what is now Foundation for Louisiana, but was the Louisiana Disaster Recovery Foundation. So that's how I found myself in New Orleans initially. Once I arrived, I learned a lot more about the context, right? I didn't have any idea what had happened in the politics of what went down, particularly with the school system. And so I find myself working to reopen schools and be giving a directive not to hire any former teachers. Like, this is the tomfoolery that's going on post-Katrina. Naomi Klein wrote the book Shock Doctrine that talks about the ways in which folks just jump in like vultures in a disaster to try to, there's a lot of money to be made in a disaster. And we saw that in New Orleans playing out across every single system, from housing to education. And so once I arrived in New Orleans, something wasn't making sense with how they were trying to bring schools back online, and particularly in how they were restaffing the school. And again, I'm thankful to the wisdom of my mentors and the Black women in my life at that moment. So Stephen, Sharice, West, in addition to Lynetta, who really helped me understand what was going on and even how my leadership was trying to be used in that moment, right? Because the former teachers I was telling couldn't have a job looked just like me, right? Because they, in all of the ills of the New Orleans school system was being put on them. And so sorting through that, my stuff hadn't even arrived from New York City by the time I'm learning all of this. And so I was guided through them to leave the job I had moved from New York City with a little bit of money in my pocket to leave there and join the team at LDRF. So that was how I got to philanthropy, was in that way. And so Christy and I actually met each other, both of us young program officers at LDRF, excuse me, yes, LDRF at the time is going like, is that the right acronym? Foundation for Louisiana. But I just want to say and shout out to, again, the women whose shoulders we stand on, but I also want to mention that they were intentional, not just about the strategy, they were also really intentional about who they chose to sit in the seats. So it was Christy and myself, but we were really stepping in on the backs of our sisters like Ashley Shelton and Samantha Bickham, who had been Black women in philanthropy prior to us, who had also very much been raised under their tutelage. And so, you know, I appreciate you starting this conversation, Toya, by lifting them up, because I think they were strategists in so many ways. They were strategists about what was important to center inside of the recovery opportunity, which was looking at the conversation around equity, right? They launched one of the first policy campaigns I can remember in the country, Christy, that was explicitly about equity, right? And so they had the foresight then to begin having conversations around equity and inclusion, which was the name of the campaign, and to make sure that they placed Black women like myself and Christy in positions of power to execute that.
Thank you both for just sort of helping to fill in the background and the context, because, you know, what is so often lost along the way, right, is the sort of strategic nuances that are at play when responding to situations and community that not only are, you know, are fraught with suffering and with, you know, the need to resource folks in the most basic ways, but so you've got to sort of think about how to get that done, but having the longer view, because of the connection to community and the understanding of what's at stake if the responsibility and the opportunity aren't carried with the same kind of weight and intentionality. And so fast forward to now, we have Foundation for Louisiana. Shout out to Foundation for Louisiana, the fiscal home of Voice, Vision, Value, and the amazing leader, Flozell Daniels, who also is a student of many of the women we're talking about tonight. And we now have the Greater New Orleans Funders Network, right? And so when you think about the legacy of those women, the legacy of their strategic leadership, intentionality, and commitment to community, and the evolution of institutions that carry those values and that have evolved and transformed over time. And the most recent addition, Women's Foundation of the South, right? Gladys, Sharice, founding members of that organization, where Christy now serves as vice president. So you've had this sort of interesting circle and community of sisterhood that has been sustained from pre-Katrina and post-Katrina, all the way up through COVID and Ida, And this sort of moment of reckoning for many institutions and systems, but particularly philanthropy. And I think New Orleans is, particularly well positioned in this moment of transformation and reckoning because of the seeds that were planted pre-Katrina, post-Katrina, right? So can you all talk about what has been sustained in the leadership representation of Black women at this moment, right? What does that look like today? And how does it mirror what you inherited? And then we'll talk about how you're now transitioning into new roles and responsibilities. So Takema, I'll ask you to start.
Ask me the question again. What is it about the leadership positioning? What is it? Give me that again.
The current sort of representation of Black women in New Orleans, right? And what you inherited from the women, the Sharice, Lynetta, Gladys, and others. So what does that representation look like today? Right, gotcha. Yeah, thank you for that, Toya. So it's interesting because there's it feels a little fuzzy because we're all emerging out of COVID and all trying to figure out who's where. And we've actually seen some very recent attrition in the representation of Black women in our field. I would say about 5 years ago, Toya, right around the time we were really deepening our friendship and our working relationship, we had really hit a pretty high number. I mean, I think there wasn't one major foundation in New Orleans that didn't have Black women in senior leadership. And just more recently, we've seen a mass exodus. And so it's been a bit of a bell curve and we seem to be on the downslope. I'm hoping as, things begin to get sorted post-COVID. But what I will say is, we do see Black women in more higher level senior positions than we have before. For a very long time, I think Lynetta was the only one in that space in New Orleans, I believe, at her time. I mean, I think you probably could have counted folks on one hand. We're also not a community that's necessarily flush with foundations, right? We're not in Atlanta, we're not in New York, we're not in Oakland. And so our foundation landscape looks different. And so we try to account for that, especially at the Greater New Orleans Funders Network. We try to be a space for anyone in the field at any position to be in a space with other colleagues to strengthen their muscle around collaboration and around race, equity, and justice. And so, we're a space where corporate foundations, private, family, community, but we also have quite a bit of representation from national foundations. And so Christy sat at the table as a representative of the Kellogg Foundation doing deep work in New Orleans. And so our landscape looks like a mix of those of us who are local, but then also folks like you, Toya, those of you who are working nationally in New Orleans is one of those places that you are deeply connected, and we create space around Ganofin to help you plug in. And I would say the architecture of Ganofin is a direct output of Christy's work on Central City, which is a direct output of Lynetta and Gladys's and Sharice's architecture on LDRF. And so the through line and the DNA of their legacy and our collective legacy runs through all of that work. We can say words like in 18 years, right? We've got new vocabulary. We can talk about white supremacy and white privilege and racial equity and justice and actually know what one another is talking about. And so to me, the legacy is that we can have a different kind of conversation than we were having 18 years ago when Christy and I started in fields. And we now have institutions that are hopefully going to last and stand and be there for Black women's leadership. One thing I'm really proud about in Ganofin and Christy and Toya, we've all done that together, is how we have created multiple opportunities within that structure for leadership.
You know, it used to be, unless you were a CEO or in the C-suite, you weren't invited to certain meetings, you weren't part of certain conversations, your voice wasn't heard. And when Black women don't show up in those seats, then what do those conversations look like, right? And so in many ways, since the beginning, Ganofin has been about flipping the script on that and saying that folks throughout the foundation, folks sitting in grants management and operations, have something to add to the conversation as well. And so, you know, I think that is our collective legacy, how it shows up beyond just like the senses of how many of us are in. We are all up and through because we have baked ourselves into the structures, and that was strategic.
If I could just pick up where Takema left off, I want to go back a little bit, Toya, because I think going back really helps to emphasize what Takema's just shared. And when we started to build out Ganofin, and even all along the way, the networks and the relationships that were built allowed us to hold each other accountable. We coached one another. When opportunities became available for, you know, a position opened up in a foundation, there was a meeting. Who's up next, right? Like, and how do we prep them to make sure that they're ready for this role? And when someone was new to philanthropy, there was a lot of let's have lunch. You're not crazy. This is really happening to you, but we're here to support you. And you know, every step of the way, I was definitely the beneficiary of those kind of conversations. And in turn, I also had those discussions with other women, in particular Black women, as they were joining foundations through, you know, in New Orleans at every level, at the corporate level, at the community level, and national funders that chose New Orleans as a place. And doing that, you know, we care for one another on a personal level, and building those relationships allowed us to develop strategy differently. How can we give each other cover when it's needed? How can we, you know, I can't fund this part, but you can fund this part, and I can pick up the other side. You know, how do we get to a holistic approach by everybody playing their part? We couldn't do that without building trusted relationships. And so now, you know, today, you know, we've seen a lot of transitions. Takema's letter went out today about Ganofin. A little tear. But, you know, even in that, everybody's going on to something greater, right? And so it's not so much that we are losing, we're losing ground in New Orleans. I don't think that's the case at all. We're seeing a ripple effect that's much broader than just New Orleans, and folks are taking the work that they've done in this city and the partnerships that they've forged to have to influence a much grander strategy, and to be able to still direct resources to New Orleans and support the communities here, but also have this just this ripple effect that is much bigger. I would say even on a global scale.
And also, Christy, to be well, right? Because
right.
There is just value in our wellness. And so many folks are making that, you know, making those transitions as well, as they make decisions to be well. So.
Absolutely. A lot of life has happened over these 18 years that we're talking about. You know, so many life changes, marriage, children, you know, just navigating life, pandemic, all of these things, caring for parents, you know, I mean, just what I think has happened most clearly is that we've given each other permission to be whole people and to bring our full selves into this work and to support each other through the good times and to hold each other up during the not so good times. And that allows you to think differently. It allows you to, dare I say, dream and, you know, create a vision for your life, for your career, for your family that I certainly would not have been able to do. If you found me August 2005, you would have met a completely different woman. And, just being in that space of such just a devastating trauma, and to be able to understand throughout these relationships that healing is possible. It's for me, it's for Takema, it's for all of us, and that we can be well and do great work. We don't have to leave it all on the field.
Yeah, I appreciate you all bringing wellness into the conversation, right? Because you've grown up in philanthropy in a part of the country that has been described as in a constant state of recovering from something, right? Natural disasters, some man-made disasters. And the holding of the work and the responsibility you carry for yourselves and for community in a state of ongoing sort of fixing and putting out fires. When did wellness become a priority?
Well, this is my favorite topic. It really has, and it's been, I feel like it's my life lesson, right? And I'm still trying to get at it, and I'm still working on it. I feel like as Black women, it's probably all of our life lessons. I was thinking about, Katrina, and how in many ways, right, like there was crises in New Orleans before Katrina. There are crises in Black communities across this country. We were constantly in a state of crises. And in many ways, Black women have become professional crises managers. Like that's what we're good at. And we get so good at it, we learn how to put ourselves on the sideline in the midst of it. And I think the wellness piece really became something I became aware of while I was doing the work post Katrina and watching friends like mine, like Christy, who were beating the midnight oil and then going home to a FEMA trailer. And I was like, something here doesn't, Christy, you were one of the last people I know who moved into your house. I remember I was so like that punch list. I was like, could she just get her floors in? I just need her to have doors, right? Like
2008, March of 2008. The storm hit August 2005. I moved into my house March 2008.
Right. In the meantime, she's moving, she's processing grants and trying to move resources. And so that was when I would say 2-3 years into the kind of work we were doing post Katrina, folks started falling out. Like folks really started burning out and hitting a wall, and everyone looked like me. It was all other Black women. It was Black women community leaders, and it was even my Black women colleagues in philanthropy. And so that was really when I started paying attention to myself and to the other women in my life. It was when I remember like the first grants around wellness, and people were experimenting with other kinds of fellowships, and because the leaders in our community were just really drowning because they themselves didn't have a place to stay, right? Like they're fighting for housing. We're flying them to DC to advocate at the White House and Congress, and then they're going home to their FEMA trailers full of formaldehyde. Right? Like just something's not working. And so wellness became a theme that I think I started tracking and became really aware of from that experience. And I have watched, myself as my career, began to evolve. I watched how wellness really began to slip in my own life. And so for me, it's been a journey back to wellness, and some of the recent decisions that I'm making for myself, even how we've tried to embed wellness at Converge, is all me trying to learn a different way to be a Black woman professional, right? That doesn't require my body, right? Doesn't require me to be sick, doesn't require me to fall out, so that I am not able to take care of myself, my children, my family, and therefore my sisters in our greater community. So that's where, for me, it becomes like, it begins and ends with wellness. How are we going to go rescue our communities when we are not well ourselves? One of my favorite books is Salt Eaters by Toni K. Bambara. And the very first line of the book is, do you want to be well? It is a choice. We get to make the choice. And something I've learned about, this work and who I am and how I am wired as a Black woman, I'm going to jump in and try to help. Like, I am going to try to lead. That's how I'm made. But it also requires me to make sure I'm taking care of myself. And that's something these 18 years have taught me.
So Toya, I would love to say that we just heard the word and, we learned from observing others. But as my father always says, there's two ways to learn, an easy way and a hard way. Some things can be learned the easy way, others the hard way. But the most important thing is that you learn. He said that to me so much growing up. That was like my senior superlative thing in my yearbook. That was my quote, Wayne Wallace. We learn the hard way. We learn the hard way, and watching each other and experiencing things for ourselves. And still, we learned to normalize being in pain. And we just soldiered on because of the belief that we were all, and I still believe this, we're all working on something that is bigger than ourselves. But what we didn't learn was we didn't have to sacrifice ourselves in support of this bigger thing. Every Black woman I know has had a health crisis in this work, myself included. We learned the importance of self-care because of all the crying. We would just break down in meetings. I went into labor in the middle of a very heated funder meeting in Central City because my daughter said, you know what, I'm sick of these people. She wouldn't come for another 2 weeks, but she put me on bed rest. She was like, I'm done and seen. We're wrapping this up right now. And even then I was like, oh, wait, but mm-mm. We had to shut it down. She's 10 now, so she got her way and is still getting her way. But it's, it was just that. It was, just all of the pain that went alongside of the pockets of joy and the winds, trying to have the winds sustain us, but they weren't lasting as long anymore, and it just got to a point where each of us had to make some real decisions. I remember Ivy Allen talking about another Black woman leader, president and CEO of Foundation in the Mid-South. We were in a meeting. This was early on when I was still at LDRF. Ivy said, there are no philanthropic emergencies. So you need to learn how to take care of yourself. And I in that meeting, I was in tears when she said that. And it always stuck with me. And all of the other things that people say, if you're on an airplane, you got to put the oxygen mask on you. We know all of the stuff. We can say them, we can put them on t-shirts, whatever. But the doing is where the magic is, and we're still learning how to do that part.
So we're still learning, but I think we're also creating new spaces and new, ways in which what we've learned the hard way can help ease the pathway for those coming up the line, right? Like, that is voice, vision, value. It is 20 years in this game. What have I learned? Who do I know? What are the lessons we've learned together? And how do we build something that opens up the conversation and creates safe space for the healing, for the restoration, for the joy, for the centering of ourselves and one another, because we know that that was not something that was consistently available and sustained for our community of leaders. And I would say this is a nice segue into Women's Foundation of the South, right? And what undergirds that institution is wellness. And I would argue or proposition that it was created in the lesson learning of all that is sacrificed and lost in the fight and in the struggle, for the fight and for the struggle, right? And so now there's this new organization created primarily by Black women, for women leaders in the South. And, I think Takema, I've heard you say often, when Black women, we are bringing everybody in the room. So Women's Foundation of the South is for women of color in the South. And so Christy, can you talk a little bit about Women's Foundation of the South and in the context of, right, the Louisiana Disaster Recovery Foundation, Central City Funders Collaborative, yep, Greater New Orleans Funders Network, and now we have Women's Foundation of the South, because there is a through line.
Absolutely. So all of the women on this call were a part of its creation, and just dreaming of what could be. What would it look like? A lot of the questions we asked, the initial women that were our grantees was, what does freedom look like, right? And so the Women's Foundation of the South is created to build the health, wealth, and power of women and girls of color across 13 states of the American South. It was created because we know who's doing the work in communities, right? We know that nonprofit organizations led by women of color get the least amount of resources, and they are doing the work that is most proximate to the conditions and the challenges in communities. And if it's an organization led by a Black woman, it gets an even smaller percentage of that little bit of nothing that women of color led organizations receive from philanthropy. It was the vision of our president and CEO, Carmen James Randolph, she's not on this call because right now she's resting. She's had an extremely busy 2 days and she is taking a break, a much needed break. And so many women, many of the names that we've listed just in our time this evening were a part of the building and the visioning of this foundation. And I was even a part of the strategic planning before I knew that I would even join the foundation. I was honored to be a part of helping to build what this will become. And so it officially launched in August of 2021. So we're 8 months old. We've made our first round of grants. And that first round was for a program called Woke at Rest, Women of Color at Rest. And just giving 26 leaders, all women of color in the Greater New Orleans region, rest, a 1.5 day retreat to just take some time for themselves, support for their leadership development. And we are, in those moments, learning from them, what does freedom look like? It's helping us to shape what our grant making strategy will be, how we will invest in communities, and that giving folks that space, giving women in particular that space, it took a lot of convincing. They didn't believe it was for them. Are you serious? I just get to rest and be among like-minded peers. And
you have to tell the part about women not believing when the invitation went out, right?
So when the invitations went out, and I'm telling the story secondhand because I wasn't here yet. But it's so beautiful. Knowing that was going to happen, I was like, be prepared for the tears. Just be prepared. So the invitations went out with love boxes. And in the box, it was all kinds of items for self-care. Tea, a mug, candle, bath bombs, this type of things. And our staff at the time, our board members, as well, hand delivered these love boxes to the women who were going to be our first grantees and were invited to the Woke at Rest retreat. And to a person, just tears. Wait, you're doing this for me? And some were coming out of, well, all of these leaders, I should say, were very instrumental in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. So on top of COVID, we had a devastating hurricane. And on the anniversary of Katrina last year in 2021. And so again, these women who are leaders in their community do what they always do, pushing the extra mile. This was a moment to honor them. Many of these women, we had folks that were in this first retreat who, we had one as an executive director of one organization and staff of another, but wasn't getting paid in the organization that she leads so that she could pay her staff, and her salary came from the other organization. So we're talking about women who are working 2 or 3 jobs, leading nonprofit organizations in the greater New Orleans region. And, this is what we've experienced here. So this year we're going to go into Mississippi, we're going into Arkansas, and eventually we're going to work our way across all 13 states. And I expect more of the same. I expect to see, just the convincing that this is for you. This is a moment for you. This needs to be a part of your leadership so that you can continue to show up in the way that you do. You have to renew yourself in order to be there for the community that you serve.
Thank you for sharing that, Christy. I'm getting questions on text, not in the chat. So that's what I'm looking at my phone to share with folks. One of the questions is about, how did you all in New Orleans create trust and vulnerability as a community of Black women in philanthropy? But what you've described, right? You were there when each other had children. You were there reading the punch list on Christy's, construction of her house after Hurricane Katrina. So the intimacy and the vulnerability and the trust, how did you create that? How do you sustain it? How does competition and envy not come into play? How do you honor each other's unique contributions? Because that for me is what I've witnessed and what I've been invited to be part of all the way in Illinois. But it's unique. And a lot of sisters in this space and in other sectors don't have that as part of their experience. So how did that come to be, and how have you sustained it?
Yeah, so I want to say, I think for me, it was modeled for me. I've always seen Black women do that with each other, right? And I think it was very much modeled for us in the story we were telling you about the legacy on which we stand. When I moved to New Orleans, I moved in with Lynetta's daughter, right? There was this sense that those of us who were Black in philanthropy at the time were a family, right? And we were responsible to each other. But I feel like that was the expectation very much that was modeled for us. So I would say that I want to give credit to, I think, the folks who mentored and modeled us, that this is how we were shown. I was, Gladys took me out to drink to explain, right, how this is going to work. So I just would say it was modeled, and I think we continued it. So we continue to see the value of being poured into, and therefore the responsibility of pouring into each other. I saw how much it meant to care, but also to be cared for. So I would say it was modeled, and we very much continued it, invested in it. It's not because there's never been conflict amongst us, because I'm sure there has been, but I think when the conflict has arisen, most of the time it had to do with our institutions and not us personally. But when it does arise, it's it's presenting itself based on 18 years of friendship and living life together, right? And so it just we process it differently. I think we have all watched each other. Christy, this is the fourth role that I've known you in, right? So we have also watched each other move from place to place. What we know is the assignment is still the same. Move as much money, no matter what position you're playing, to communities of color, right? Like that was the mandate we were given. And we understood that we were a family, no matter what the institution or the role we were sitting in.
Absolutely. I think we all got the speech that the work is the work. It doesn't matter where you are, right? I want to say that was Gladys. I think Gladys had that conversation with each of us. And, just what Takema was saying, I don't want folks to leave this call thinking that everything was just sunshine and roses. I mean, we were working in extreme circumstances, and we were, and it wasn't that, everybody just got along really well. We all had moments where folks pulled us aside and say, hey, your slip is showing, right? And let's get in line and figure this out. But part of that is constantly being in these conversations, and there's always the meeting after the meeting, right? There's the kitchen cabinet conversations. All of those things were a part of this to build these larger structures. And in those moments is where the relationships were being built, right? We were shoulder to shoulder doing this work. And especially because we were coming at it from different institutions, and even within the same institutions from different departments, right? So when I met Takema, she was doing the neighborhood organizing and planning work. I was doing affordable housing and small business recovery work for at LDRF. And understanding how we could work together within the same organization, and then how we could partner with other organizations was a lot of the learning. And it was, the willingness to listen, to learn, to be bold when necessary, to fall back when necessary. All of that was a learning. Because for a lot of us, this was new. It was, certainly the circumstance was new. The field, for me was new, and trying to understand the power of philanthropy and what it could do, what its limits were, and all of the possible ways things could be leveraged, and figuring out there's always a way to win. So how do we do this work together? Really clear that none of us could do this by ourselves. Certainly within the institutions we were coming from, with the resources that we had to figure out a way to work together, or we were going to miss an incredible opportunity to try and center equity in this recovery, to center Black and Brown folks and make sure that they were not worse off post-storm, with all these millions and millions and billions of dollars that were coming to the region. It was just too great for us to let our egos get in the way of what this moment presented. So all of that, it was just the decisions. It was decisions all along to figure out a way for us to collectively work so that the community could win.
Thank you both for that. And so I got a question from the chat, but I also have a comment from Maud Lofton, who is asking about documenting this story. And yes, Maud, we are documenting this story. As a matter of fact, we will kick off the Voice, Vision, Value book project, which is going to document the leadership impact of Black women in 10 regions across the country. And we're starting off in New Orleans in April. So be on the lookout for that book, which is slated for release at the end of the year. But this Woman Crush Wednesday series is also another way to sort of open up the conversation and share these stories and lessons with women across sectors, not just in philanthropy. So check out the website, check out the Centering Ourselves report, which speaks a lot to how philanthropy learned from the lessons and the strategies coming out of Katrina, and how the field was ready in a different kind of way to respond to Ida, thanks to the leadership and strategic commitment of folks like Christy and Takema and Ashley Sheldon, who was named earlier, and Sam Bickman, who was on with us. I don't know if she's still here with us, but hey, Sam, and Sharice West Scantleberry, who's also with us. So the question is from Verna Hamilton. Thank you for the question. To what extent does the strong Black woman trope and Black women's tacit agreement with it set the stage for burnout and health crises? Who wants to take that?
Well, I'll say hello.
I removed the word strong from my vocabulary and I took off the cape. I burned it about 3 years ago, so.
And as have I. And so hi, Verna. So thank you for joining. Verna's on the Converge team. So I want to say shout out to all Converge team members who are joining us. And I think that is such a good question. And I wish we had like a whole other hour to talk about it, because I do think we are complicit in our own suffering. But in many ways, right, like I've been talking about modeling and mentors, and the way many of our mentors modeled overwork and burnout for us, right? And so when I think about my generation, Gen X, when I think about Christy and I's leadership journey, so much has been about unlearning and coming to the terms that we're participating. We are participating. Again, the question that opens that book, Salt Eaters by Tony K. Barbara, is, do you want to be well? Because wellness is no laughing matter. You need to make a decision. And so the institutions that many of us are talking about are often not led by BIPOC folks, and are not set up by us, and are not necessarily set up to serve us. And so it's very, very easy, particularly in philanthropy, and I think particularly in purpose-driven work. We've been talking about this was bigger than us, and the self-sacrifice, right, that we assign to ourselves in order to serve this thing bigger than us. And it does have a double-edged sword. To Christy's point, each one of us have had a health crisis. I had a 24-week-old baby while working in philanthropy. And so, I think all of us, I know Christy is on a wellness journey. I know Toya, you burned the cape. We're all on this journey together. But a big part of what I think the generation of Black women, who I call my friends, I think we are breaking a generational curse. We are learning how to do this differently, right? The model that was given to us didn't work. And in the same way, I think we are the vanguard of the conversation, the modern conversation on racial equity and justice in our field. We're also the vanguard of the conversation about wellness in our field, and the learning and the journey is happening in our lives and in our bodies and in our experiences. And so we're now, I think, getting to the point in our journeys when we realize it doesn't work, and we need to sort of start to make changes and begin to model it for the young women coming behind us. Only because I'm not going to name names, but I'm going to say I was talking to someone 2 weeks ago who's younger than me in the field, and she was telling me that she had had a conversation with Christy the day before. So it continues, right? We are trying to pay forward and pass forward the lessons, the hard-earned lessons that we have learned in our lives to the folks coming behind us, the Black women, the young Black women coming into the roles. We're trying to move out the way so they can step into our shoes. We're trying to apply it in our lives and live it boldly and loudly so people can see what it looks like. But to be honest, we have been complicit in our own suffering. And I do know that for me, this time for COVID, this time of getting still has, given me an opportunity to face that and make some very, different decisions that include, my resignation as director of Ganofin, which is both about, my legacy, my next chapter, but also opening up the space that hopefully will be filled by another Black woman to lead it.
Absolutely. And, again, I wish I could tell a different story, but I absolutely was complicit. I am still complicit. My cape is still hanging on by a string. Everybody else has hung theirs up. I'm almost there. I keep starting over. But I have to, I have to say, when I was at LDRF and the transition into to FFL, Foundation for Louisiana, I didn't think it was possible to work any harder, right? And then when I got the opportunity to move to the Kellogg Foundation, I was the first program officer in New Orleans. They had a new place-based strategy. So I was the first one here, and eventually I was with the Kellogg Foundation for just shy of 9 years. And so we certainly built out a team over that time. And once I had a team, it was, oh, well, we're going to take this Black Girl Magic train all the way to the top. And it was Black excellence. And we were going 100 miles an hour. And it was one of my younger colleagues that said, hey, you keep promising that we're going to slow down. And each year we ramp up even further when we thought we couldn't go any further, faster, and it was having folks come in behind me and say, you got to slow down. So I need you to slow down so that I believe that I can slow down. And so it was having that level of accountability, holding me to my promise. This is what I said we were going to do. And finally, starting to, right before I left, we had put some practices in place that was building in some slowdown and some thoughtful time, some time on the calendar that was, we had genius days where this was just, if you want to learn something, this is like not a time for it to be full of meetings, and starting to put things into practice so that we could slow ourselves down, so that we would have time to rest, so that we would have time to think. But it took somebody else and a couple of health crises to say, okay, no, this is not sustainable. There's a different way to do this, and we can still get the outcomes that we're looking for, but we don't have to kill ourselves doing it. And then I think the best advice I got, and I saw that folks put it into practice as each of us transitioned, was taking a break and planning for a break in between starting a new role. For most of us, we say, oh, I'm ready for something new. Maybe you take 2 weeks and then you're into the next thing and you're off and running again. No, every conversation was, okay, well, I'm excited for your new opportunity, but how much time are you going to take for yourself? And even as conversations we're having where folks were starting to think about transition, more and more and earlier in those discussions with each of us was like, okay, yes, and start planning now. How can you take a break? You need some transition time, and really, really take that serious. You need some transition time before you go into the next thing. So I am happy to say that I did at least do that part. And it was necessary. It was absolutely necessary. There's no way I could have left the Kellogg Foundation and come to Women's Foundation of the South without having taken that break and just having that time to process and understand, this is a next new thing. And how do I want to show up in this role, living the values of this foundation that values wellness, that values, the fact that we can do great work while being well, and hold myself and my colleagues accountable to this culture that we are creating. And so it's, we have been our own worst enemy, and now we're trying to be our best friend. And each of us are holding each other to that. So that's even more beautiful to witness, because we're, the check-ins are different now. Yeah. They all start with, how are you doing? And then, if we ever get to the work, that's fine, but it's more about how are you, what's going on with you at this moment.
And we talk about each other behind each other's, because you will get talked about if you're not showing up. Somebody needs to come get you. And that's what I love, right? Like, we really are a community. We are all committed to each other beyond, again, our institutional assignments. And it's because we all know that we're all committed to our communities. And we know that that commitment is bigger than each individual one of us. But I also will say, Christy, I think we have also had to learn that we deserve the rest, that we deserve the wellness, that our value is not in the doing, but in our being. And I love the fact that our conversations have transitioned from what are you doing to how are you being.
Yeah. And it's not just how are you doing, right? When we got on 15 minutes before everybody, we talked about our kids. Sometimes we talk about our families. There is a genuine opening up space for the whole individual, and for us to show up as our full, complicated, sometimes messy, not always pulled together selves. Because that also speaks to our ability to honor, recognize, and center the real everyday lived experiences that are on the ground and conditions that folks are dealing with. And if we're not, if we're not pretending that, this life is hard, even for us, and all the privilege and opportunity that we sort of situate ourselves in because of the work that we do, that I think can muddy the waters in a way that's just not helpful, and could be and is often harmful when we're not clear about who we are and who each other are, and holding that all the time and bringing that with us all the time. So I think we have one more question before we wrap up. Oh no, that's Christy just saying hi to Sam. Okay. So before we wrap up, I want to share with the audience and with you some of your own words for you all to sort of speak life into. Because you each, Takema's letter went out last week that she's transitioning in her role as the founding executive director of the Greater New Orleans Funders Network. Christy shared that she left Kellogg at the end of last year to become the first ever vice president of programs for the Women's Foundation of the South. Again, a new philanthropic organization created by Black women. Some would say who were the chief architects of the recovery and transformation strategy that lives on in the New Orleans region today. But you both stepped into these new chapters, and we all share a coach in Eva Montalvo, and she has, the work that she's done with us is often sort of centering and getting clear about what the vision is that we have for our life and for our legacy. And so, Christy, I believe that your vision statement for the work is that communities of color across the US and global South are experiencing greater mental, physical, and financial health. And did you write this statement before or after Women's Foundation of the South was created and you joined the foundation as a VP of programs? Which came first?
The statement came first.
Okay.
The statement came first. And absolutely, coaching was essential, right? In addition to this powerful group of women having this particular dynamic coach really helped me to get out of my own way and see that whether I was planning for it or not, I was leaving a legacy. So why not have some direction to it and take the space to, just like we've been talking this entire time about, creating the space to dream and envision something bigger. And I can see it. I see it so clearly. Healing centers across the global South, that are focused and dedicated to building essentially the health, wealth, and power of people of color. I mean, it's so that statement came first. And I was also a part of the strategic planning for Women's Foundation of the South. And then when this opportunity came, it was clear for me, if I'm going to build this legacy, then I need to expand beyond New Orleans and Mississippi and look at the Southern US as the first stop in order to get to the global South. So I'm living my legacy plan. And I could not have envisioned this. I couldn't have ordered these steps. This is definitely bigger than me. I set the vision, I made it plain, and it is starting to fall in line.
And I think sort of the intentionality around sort of visioning and sort of disciplining ourselves to do that work, whether it's through a vision board or working with a coach and fleshing out a legacy plan, because you're right that the same has been true for me. And so Takema, I remember when I interviewed you 5 years ago for an issue of APFI magazine that was all about Black women in philanthropy. And one of the things you said is, Black women, we're going to set the world free. And and so fast forward to this quote that I took from a keepsake that is on one of your Converge swag products. And it says, "We are the freedom dreams of our ancestors and the architects of a future for generations to come." So talk about that statement and what it means within the context of where you're headed as you prepare to transition from the Funders Network.
Absolutely. So they say 7 generations before and 7 generations ahead, right? And so for me, that's what that statement, we are the freedom dreams of our ancestors. We are the results of their dreaming. I think about what it meant to imagine freedom when you were born into slavery, right? And the fact that there was enough humanity left in our folks to fight for us to create a future. And so that really speaks to me. And this idea that we therefore are now the architects of the future that our children and children's children will inherit. I feel like it really situates us in purpose. It really it really requires us to think about how we use the time that we have here on Earth. The other sort of mission statement for Converge, which is my company and the work that I will continue to build out after I leave the Funders Network, is talking about creating a radically just new world where communities of color thrive. And that is that architecture work. What is the future going to look like? And I think we have, if anything, I'm a sucker for possibility, right? And I think that's what got me roped in to New Orleans post-Katrina, was the possibility to reimagine, to break structural racism, and to create a different type of world, a different type of future. And I can only say, because, not only the legacy of the women who we've mentioned and lifted up, Lynetta Gilbert, Sharice West Scantlebury, Gladys Washington, but all the other women who came before them, right? That this is true. This is true. Each one of us, each generation moves the conversation forward. And so, I want my legacy to be that I use my time here to advance the conversation on racial justice, to move the conversation forward for particularly women of color. And that looks like not only my career, but it looks like how I model that in my life and where my life takes me beyond my career.
Well, thank you both for making the time to be part of this conversation and continue to model sisterhood and a ongoing contribution to the field writ large, Not everyone is comfortable coming on a platform like this and being vulnerable and honest and open about the professional and personal challenges and triumphs. I am excited to see where the future takes us. We've gotten into some good trouble together, and I imagine there's more to come. So I end all of these conversations with the same question. And so each of you can take a few minutes to answer in your closing remarks, along with whatever else you want to share. Voice, vision, value, what resonates with you most and why? So I'll start with Christy.
I'm typing shout outs in the chat. Thinking about all of the women, so there's so many names. I don't have a particular one. They all have to go together, and they all build upon each other. I think you have to have the vision, and you raise your voice led with your values. And so it's all three. It's all or none. They all have to go together.
Any other final or closing remarks?
Just thankful. I mean, it's always a wonderful time to be in the company of you and Takema. And I just really appreciate, and I said it in the beginning, I'm honored to be in this conversation and to think that, I guess it goes back to what we've been talking about all along, to even believe that the work that you've done has been impactful enough that somebody else wants to hear about it. And I didn't travel this road alone. It's been filled with so many powerful, brilliant women that have, guided me, have held me up when I needed it, have supported me, have cheered for me. I mean, so I'm trying not to cry in these last couple of seconds, but it really is, it's a beautiful thing to behold. And I know that it is unique. It is not the norm. And so it has been, I think, for each one of us, a part of our mission to carry that on and to be that for others. Everything that was poured into us, I know everything that was poured into me, I try to pour into others. I just thank you. That's all I can say. Thank you. I'm so grateful.
Well, thank you. And Takema?
I am going to go with value. And I'm going to go with value, not in terms of values, which I know Black women are full of values, but because we are full of value. And I really feel like that has been our journey. We have been learning what our value to this work is, what our value to one another is, what our value to community is. And for us to know that and to know our power has really been the journey that I feel like we've been on together, Christy. I think Black women are finally showing up in this field to the report and the work that you're doing, Toya, demanding appreciation and compensation, but also space for our leadership and our value. So I love the word value. That's really what's resonating with me. And my highest wish is that we all know what our value is and that our field begin to know and recognize it. Because again, to the point, so much of our value is the unseen work, the meetings between the meetings, the meetings to hold each other up and put each other back together, the meetings to figure out how we're going to move this to meet this need in this community, and this leader is falling apart. And, and so for me, it is that we, through this work, through opening these conversations, through the reports and the books and all of that, that we understand our value, we stand in our value, and that our field reciprocates and appreciates the value that we bring every single day.
Well, with that, I want to say thank you to you both, not just for tonight, but everything that has occurred in relationship to the work and in relationship to the sort of building of community in New Orleans and beyond, the community of Black women in philanthropy, and the ways in which we have been trained and committed to supporting each other, but also supporting folks beyond the field, right? And so it is something to behold. And I thank you both for holding it so beautifully, and for sharing tonight in a way that, again, is not often the case for leaders at your place in the journey as CEOs and vice presidents. We don't often get to share these stories openly and honestly and freely. And by free, I mean, like, this didn't cost anybody anything. There was no registration fee. You don't have to be a member. And so the way in which we are expanding and opening up the space in ways that are accessible to each other and to folks who we know need to hear these stories, the names we know and the names we don't know. So I thank you both, and I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks when we kick off the book project and take pictures and tell more stories and document all the beauty that you have helped create in New Orleans and beyond. So thanks again. I love you both dearly. Thanks to our audience for hanging around and being a part of this conversation. Next month, we will be on the road for the Woman Crush Wednesday conversation in DC with Erica Seth Davies and Dr. Jamila Parrott, talking about Black women leading philanthropy through the lens of reproductive justice and maternal health. And so that event will not be live because we will be in person having the conversation, but we'll have a write-up of the key talking points and sort of sharing the takeaways from that. So we'll rebroadcast an old episode for the Wednesday conversation in April. So thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Christy and Takema, and I will see y'all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Love you. Love you both.
Love you too.